Thank you. And I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I'm a little bit under the weather. I've had a lot of cold medicine this morning, so things might get a little bit weird. How do I make this bad boy go? Oops. There we go. I believe that technology can make magic, and it can do a lot of good, but it can also do quite a bit of evil, and we're going to get into that a little bit. It can go wrong, and when it goes wrong, we experience it every day. How many of you guys do a search, and you're kind of curious about why these results are coming back and what you're getting from that search, and it doesn't seem quite like what you were looking for? One of the biggest dark patterns is the fact that all of the search engine companies are actually paying more homage to the folks that are advertising with them, and they get first priority. And I don't know if anybody's been following the legal cases that are going on around the globe right now, but actually this week it came out that not only are the search engine players making huge profit off of that, but it slipped in the Google case that Apple is actually getting 36% revenue on every search that comes through. That's billions and billions of dollars. So all of this stuff is stacked against us when we think about our well-being, and it has nothing to do with them trying to help us. It has a whole lot to do with making 5 or 6 white dudes in Silicon Valley really, really rich. And I'm doing kind of both here because we could not project my notes up here. So other types of dark patterns that come out, we were just talking about infinite scrolling. 59% of people report that as one of the top ones that is a dark pattern. Push notifications follow that very closely with 53% for interrupting you. And then recommendation engines in videos to take you way down that rabbit hole, TikTok, YouTube, etc. That's about 47%. And we know that this is happening to us in aggregate, but we can't really tell what all these big companies are doing to us. So it's kind of hard to put it all together and understand what's happening in that space. As we talked about a minute ago, 40% of people are going to check their phones every 30 minutes. So roughly half the people in this room are going to look at their phones probably before I get done talking about this topic. And that manifests in a lot of different ways physically as well. You know, we're talking about not only our mental well-being and the effects of that, but constantly looking at our phones, constantly looking at our devices manifests in back pain, headaches, eye strain, all sorts of things that contribute to not having a real, being super, super well. And again, you know, Google's doing a lot of stuff right now, and they're posting their wellness efforts, but most of their wellness efforts from a digital wellness space is just tracking the stuff you've already done, and that's not really curing anything. That's a symptom and evidence of the fact that they are keeping you in that feedback loop, and if you think that they want to help you and get you out of that feedback loop, you are sorely wrong, because they are going to make a ton of money off of you, and that is all that they are interested in. You know, for us as designers then, it's a balancing act to figure out what to do with this, right? You know, most people that are using any of these sort of tools, they want to know how their data is being used, they want clear policies, they want to be able to see what's going on, and at the same time, 75% of designers want to design in a very ethical way and have guidance around that. But we get caught in the middle because we're getting pressure to funnel clicks, get people to buy the thing, et cetera, right? So we're in this kind of tipsy-turvy world where we want to do good, but it's really hard for us to do good because we all want to keep our jobs and get paid, right? So it's a balancing act, and it's not really a fun balancing act, but I think now we're actually at an inflection point, and there's huge change ahead of us, and there's going to be some more speakers that are going to touch on this topic today. And AI is going to change everything. And I'm not going to get into kind of how it's going to change our work, but it's probably the biggest inflection point, and it's beyond 25 years. I'm at 30 years now. I'm getting old and gray. It's the biggest inflection point in the digital space that I've seen in the 30 years of my career. It is going to shift everything. And I think we as designers have a choice in kind of how this is going to play out. And when we think about it, it's really going to have to do, from our perspective, it's really going to have to do with relationships. I think it's a time that we can probably correct a lot of the past wrongs if we make the right choices, designers, and we can guide our companies in the right way and walk that balancing act and actually do something different. And I'm going to kind of dip into that. You know, when we have an innovation in front of us, you know, we should always think about that innovation and how it's going to help humanity and maybe make the planet a little bit better place. And I think this is a chance for us to do that as designers and kind of guide it in a different way. And kind of it's imperative on us to do this and guide this conversation. So, you know, like I said, I don't think our lives are really that better today. You know, I've seen a lot of change in the space. You know, we've got all the information that we want at our fingertips in our pocket. You know, I do have the ChatGPT app in my pocket, and we can talk to her if we want to and have her give us an answer right now. You know, I've also watched social media, not only just the part of constant scrolling and constantly looking at it, but it has brought us closer together, but it has also divided us in kind of horrible ways if you watch what's happening in social media. So that's something to be thinking about, you know, and it's also even impacted the way that we communicate and the way, the language that we use and the way that we talk to each other has shifted because of certain things. And we were just talking about memes, and you're talking about emojis and all these things. That has shifted the way that we fundamentally communicate as human beings now. And there's a way of maybe doing something a little bit different. I don't, you know, are we better for what we've done in the digital space today? I don't know. You know, from my perspective, I don't really think we are. I don't think the experiment worked out quite like we thought it was going to work out when I was super excited about it 20 years ago. You know, we thought it was going to join everything, and we would have, you know, great conversations, and Twitter was going to be the meeting place of the world, and now it's just a hot troll show on Twitter. So it's not working out quite like we thought it was. But we get to reimagine that again, and we get to think about relationships in a different way. AI makes us take notice of a bunch of new contexts, and when you think about designing for this space, it's going to have a massive impact on what we do, and it's going to be different than the work that we've done today in a sense of you're going to have to develop relationships, you're going to have to work on empathy and go deeper than we've ever done before. So those of you that practice in that human-centered design space, that research is going to be even more important, and you're going to need to be doing a lot of systems thinking about it, around it, and you're going to need to be really close to your data scientist buddies to understand what's happening with all of that data as it comes in. So relationships, when we think about this, we're moving away from a space where right now we enter something in a text box and kind of hit enter, and that's it. This relationship's going to get much more complex. It's going to be much more like a human relationship. So this is Knapp's relationship model, and I'm only showing you the building part of it. And what we want to talk about here is that it's going to work the same way. We have to think about these relationships in the same way. So when you meet somebody new, that's the initiating phase, and you're kind of checking them out, you're judging, you're thinking like, hey, do I want to hang out with this person or not? How's that going to work out? Then you start experimenting, you might have a conversation, you're getting to know each other, you're doing some different things, and then that relationship starts to intensify over time. You're hanging out, you're going on mountain bike trips with people, whatever, and then it's going to kind of get even more integrated. From an AI standpoint, then, we need to think about how do you establish a system's tone, and how does it show up as a presence, because it's going to start to feel really, really human-like as it advances more and more. And then you need to display kind of that provable authenticity. You got to build trust. You got to make sure that people understand what's happening and they're going to believe in the thing that they're interacting with. And then you start to deliver more multi-step context-aware interactions, and then move through kind of establishing a fully realized profile system that has a really good feedback loop with that user that's interacting with it. Bonding, I don't know that we'll ever get to that stage with a machine. I don't know that I want to get to that stage with a machine, right? So there's a lot to think about with how we balance all of this and where it actually goes. So in that, then, that context is, you know, what is the human unmet need? And it's kind of coupled with what's happening with the business and what value they're trying to provide. And then the machine is that whole kind of systems thing that's going to take that at a much deeper level. And then there's the world. That's all the data that is being ingested by this whole system. And that context in the middle then is what that human feels inside of all of that stuff and what that starts to look like. So if we spread that out and think about moving through a bit more of a process, that business part of it, we're going to look at intent. And when we think about intent, what's the goals, needs, values of the user? What are we trying to do as a business? How are we trying to couple that together? And then the world provides all of the data around that. And that's everything that you could possibly think of that the machine can ingest. It's also policy, and we need to think about the policies that wrap around it. I know in the States and in Europe, there's very quickly being a lot of clampdowns as far as regulations. I do a lot of work in healthcare. There's a bunch of new regulatory coming out with what we can and can't do and how AI needs to behave in that space. So that policy drives it, and then understanding is the process of pulling in all of that structured or unstructured data, and then reasoning. Think about that as the machine learning part of it. It's going to go through that data. It's going to make sense of it. And then it's going to start to get into the knowledge space where it uses that and converts that into something that's useful for the user. Then it expresses it to the user in either verbal, visual communication, and the user is going to give a reaction. That provides a feedback loop that's going to feed the system even more. It's going to continue to learn and continue to provide business outcomes. So in that, we need to be watching at all of these points, what's going into it, what's coming out of it, how are we designing for it, what's that relationship look like that we're building. So when we think about that, there's some pretty core foundations that are pretty straightforward and should really be foundations for anything that we're designing and building. What's the purpose? And that's the reason for the user to engage with the system. That's going to evolve as the user and the system grow with each other. Like I said, that feedback loop will be continuous as the machine is learning, the AI is learning, the user's learning how to interact with it. That relationship is becoming more concretized, and it's going to grow. And then why are they there? What are they trying to accomplish? And what's the context of use? That's pretty straight up human-centered design, good UX to be thinking about that anyways, but we need to go deeper than we ever have before with it. Then value. What are the augmented capabilities that are provided to that system that improves the user's life, right? And keep that in mind always. And what's in it for the user, right? What are they getting out of it versus what's the machine and the company stealing from us and guiding us down these rabbit holes. And then the third part is trust. And trust is an interesting thing. It's an earned and not given thing in any relationship, right? When you're talking about humans, and it is very much so when you're talking about a relationship with the company and a relationship with a machine. And it's predicated on the security of the system's data and the feeling of human control, and I'll get a little bit more into that later, and the quality of the result that the system provides. So it's that reliability and delight loop that starts to happen there with that. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some design principles to kind of follow that. It's going beyond the foundations and thinking about, as we do this work and how that work happens, inside of our teams, not just design teams, but more interdisciplinary teams, how do we start to unpack that and think about guiding people through that and applying that in a way that's really kind of leaning towards more wellness. So, all the AI geeks out there are going to hate me for this, but data is not truth, okay? And it's human driven, it's collected by us, it's impacted by us. It is, which data point we choose to collect, what we choose to do with that, and how we extend that data. That's all human decisions that are going on with that. So it's not necessarily truthful, and it's often, the results are super incomplete, it's super confusing. Analyzing it can be messy, and usually it's pretty biased. If you look at any of the tools that are out there right now, ChatGPT, kind of the whole internet, I mean, it's pretty white when we talk about the data that went in there and fed those systems. So understanding that and understanding how that data is biased is really cool. Also, AI is not about data and data only. This is the part where my data scientists at MentorMate get really upset with me. It's much more than that, and quite frankly, data is just the fuel for the car. It's not the destination. The destination are the insights that we're trying to get out of whatever our interaction is with those particular machines, right? The next thing, man, never presume. Don't make assumptions about any of this. Just because AI can do something does not mean we should be doing it. And I would say that with any design element, right? Like, just because we can doesn't mean we should. Just because I can make your logo spin does not mean I should make your logo spin on your site, right? So keep that in mind when you're doing any of this kind of work. And when it's incorporated into design work, we need to pay attention to whether people's needs are changing and whether the AI is changing. Because again, it's learning, it's moving, it's gonna be interacting and growing like a toddler right now. But those interactions are going to need constant kind of vigilance of watching and seeing what's going on with the system and how people's opinions about that are changing. It will not be constant at all. And then privacy for the collective good. That should make sense, but where we often end up with privacy for the collective good inside of a company is just do enough so we don't get sued, or do enough so the regulators don't come and clamp down on us. And we need to go beyond that. You know, if we are going to change and actually move towards more digital wellness, which is what this conference is all about, we got to step up and think about it differently. And you need to consider not only the design piece of it, you need to consider the governance of data and its use purpose, both now and future, and what's going to happen to that data, and how that's being communicated and how we are communicating with people about how their data is going to be used in any of these situations. And then the last one in this category is unintended consequences are going to happen, and see those as design opportunities. Like I said, this is super nascent, and you know, if you're working inside a product company or if you're working for a service company like I do, you should always be watching anyways that there's constant change, and we should always be iterating on those things that we find as we're moving through that work. So just get really comfortable with that and use those unanticipated consequences as a chance to iterate really quickly and move on and continue to build and continue to grow around that. So in practice, some ways of kind of playing some of that stuff out looks a little bit like this. You know, do a blind spots check. You know, how do we reduce our biases with the things that we have? Diversity is super essential to what we're trying to do. The stuff that we're putting into those learning algorithms are robust, but are they, you know, culturally sensitive and inclusive? Like I said, most of the stuff out there right now, the models that they were built on, they were built by a bunch of white dudes, and everything that's inside of those models is pretty white and not very culturally aware with everything that's going on. And some ways to kind of do this is, you know, maybe you take and you list out all the data that you have and all the knowns, list out all the unknowns, list out your blind spots, get the team thinking about that, and don't try to do it just as a designer alone. Have a data scientist in the room, have a business analyst in the room, have a technical architect in the room. Be thinking about that in kind of a much deeper way. And really kind of double check on that. And all of these principles that I'm walking through now too are also something that should really be happening in cycles. It's not just at the beginning of a project, it is constant kind of vigilance, because again, these systems are gonna grow and be kind of learning and expanding, and at some point will become our overlords and we'll be pets. But we're not gonna get into that conversation, right? So humanize the stories behind it too. You know, a lot of what I see with some of the data scientists I work, they get so heads down in the numbers, in the points of data, that sort of stuff. They're not thinking about the human on the other end of it. And a lot of our engineer buddies are not thinking about the humans on the other end of it. They're thinking about slinging sweet code and making the newest technology run and doing cool data science stuff. But try to get to where you're telling stories about the humans on the other side of that data. You know, sometimes when we do qualitative research, quant research or deep data is going to help us. Sometimes we're going to use quant work to kind of guide what our qualitative work is going to be like, and be thinking about kind of those humans on the other side of it all the time and how we're going to pull that stuff out. You know, most design challenges that I've ever worked on use both big data and small data, and use quant and qual. I used to be very much against doing surveys until I really learned how to do them in a scientific way, but having both sides of that is super important to unpack that and to be able to wrap a human story around it that the team can get behind and understand and be working on all the time. Capture minimum data. We don't need to capture everything. And most people right now, most companies are going to grab every bit of data they possibly can. And rather than collecting that, minimize what you actually need to have there, and keep only what you need to have there. And ask yourself, what do we actually need to do the project? Do we just need to know that someone's in the room, or do we need to know who's in the room? Do we need to know what someone said, or do we just need to understand the volume of their voice when we think about these things? There's a lot of different ways of looking at that, and be willing to challenge whoever's directing those projects and the data scientist folks to really only capture the minimum stuff, and also think about how long you hang on to it. Right now, we collect more data than we ever have, and we collect it, and we collect it, and we collect it, and we just keep grabbing it, right? And there's a lot to consider with how long we keep that stuff when we dump it. Like, we don't need to be holding onto those people's data forever. That's not what needs to be happening with it. So think about how that works, and the minimum amount of that you collect. And then make sure you're mapping out these systems. For those of you here last year, I talked a little bit about some systems thinking stuff, and I believe now as we tip into this space where we're managing these relationships and we're doing stuff that has a living, learning, breathing kind of system, systems thinking becomes one of our most critical skills as designers. And we need to understand how to map those systems, and we need to understand the data flow and where stuff is going with it, and having a precise knowledge of that journey, what its path was, where did it originate, who touched it, what did they do with it. Because again, all that stuff is changing as it moves through the system, and it gets super, super biased. So we need to kind of call people's bluff on that, and mapping that system will just help you understand context and what's going on with it and where they are, and help you find kind of any ambiguities, redundancies, inconsistencies, biases, etc. And it also helps us uncover new things that we may not have seen before. When you start to map that system out and you see how those things are interacting, you're going to start to see places for other solves and other problems or friction points, etc. And then monitor to course correct. My voice is starting to go now, so I apologize. So you really want to mitigate negative outcomes, and you need to be monitoring it. And this is something that most product companies, you're watching your product all the time anyways, and kind of thinking about what the next feature set is. But intelligent kind of systems are dynamic. They're constantly learning, and information's being touched still by humans. And they don't exist in isolation, so be ready to monitor that stuff. Be ready to iterate. And over time, what we think the design might be this year, we might come back the same time next year, and that design may have veered off course. So it's a lot less control on the design too as we start to work with these things, because the thing's going to grow. Like when I started my career in print, I could control everything. I could control the paper, the point size, the images, the varnish on the paper, the ink on the paper, and then I started doing digital, and I could control a little less. And then we started doing headless systems, and I could control a little less because we were deploying things in a lot of different mediums. With this, you're going to have a lot less control over it. So it's a lot more about guardrails and iteration of those guardrails and guiding things in the proper way. Because as it learns, we need to guide that. And then we need to respect culture. A lot of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about that and thinking about those sensitivities. Efficiency and optimal is what we want to do with AI. That may not be the right thing in certain contexts. Maybe I don't want it to go as fast. Maybe I want the system to be polite instead of optimal. So thinking about those comparisons and the way that we lean into that is super, super important. And just like I said, any other human relationship, it's going to be different than we've designed for in the past. And you need to think about it like it's another human talking to you, right? And just try not to compromise that stuff. And then we need to think about designing the seams. And what I mean by that is, as we begin to interact with machines, humans want to know when I need to interact with it and when I'm not interacting with it. So say I'm inside of a website and there's some portion of something that's running on AI, we need to let that human being know, hey, you're moving into something that's much more automated, and you're going to be interacting with something that's not a human on the other end of it, right? Because it gets really confusing for folks, and people want to understand that. A seamless experience right now when we're dealing with this technology is probably not the best way to be thinking about it. You want to let them know, and I was thinking about it the other day, it's like, ask yourself, what does the system know? When does the system know what's best? When should both me and the system work together on a thing, and when should I be doing the thing? And think about that for your users, right? When's the system know best for them? When should it be a paired thing? Or when should that human on the other side of that interaction be controlling that? And then think about affordance and what we need to make apparent for them as they move through their stuff. Balance giving and getting. This goes back to how I started to talk about the thing. Google, all the search engines, they've been taken, and they have not given much back to us. You know, in most interactions with humans, we think about a reciprocal thing. I give you money for beer and pizza, right? Or there's other constructs where it's a more communal thing. Hey, we're going to have a potluck dinner. Everybody bring a dish. And so we need to think about how those systems and how those exchanges of value work in a very, very different way, which is probably going to need a different kind of UX research when we're going out and we're talking to those customers and interviewing people, patients, whatever it is that we're doing. So it's going to need to be thought about differently, and working that into the system so that there is some sort of reciprocal value there is going to be super important. And then you need to anticipate future use cases. And what I'm thinking here is like the long view, right? If we're collecting this data and we've built a system, it might be cool now, but companies get sold. Priorities change for a company. All sorts of things can happen that will cause, you know, a new CEO comes in, we're going to pivot, right? Things will cause us to move in how we're using that data. And every time a pivot like that happens, we need to have anticipated whether that's good or bad for the user, what we're doing with that data, and what makes sense around that stuff. And then the last one is considering the system. Again, it's ensure the human-centered benefits for the humans, for the community, for humanity, et cetera. All these interdependencies, having that systems thinking stuff behind you is going to be super, super helpful as you think about how to move through that. So, I'll kind of wrap it up. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. That's probably the biggest, best mantra you can think about as you're moving through all of this stuff. And while I used AI to talk about these principles today, I think this should be woven into anything we're doing, whether we're doing AI or not, and thinking about how we're going to help with someone's wellness. And also, you know, like I said, we all have to eat. The balance is going to be hard. We're going to get a lot of pressure from whoever we work for, whether it's internal or whether it's multiple customers. You're going to get pressure to get clicks, to get engagement, to do all of the things. And finding that balance is going to be tough, but I tell you, if you follow the money, if you're considering going to a company or you're considering a particular client, if you follow the money and you understand how they make their money, that will tell you what sort of master you are going to be asked to serve when you start to work on those projects. Also, don't get blinded by the hype. It's just another tool, right? And we're going to have to think about designing it different, but again, don't run around and try to whack everything with an AI stick right now because everybody's asking you to do that. There's a time and a place for it, and don't get over hyped by it. And again, I guess in the end, design for purpose, value, and trust, and then we should be doing pretty good, right? Thanks, guys.